Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, dear friends and partners. Welcome all to the second session of the webinar series on resuming SDG-aligned South-South investment beyond COVID-19. My name is Xiaojun Grace Huang, Deputy Director of United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation. This workshop series is jointly organized by the UNOSSC, the China International Center on Economic and Technical Exchanges, CICETE, and the Finance Center for South-South Cooperation, FCSSC, under the framework of the Global South-South Development Center. Colleagues, with only 10 years left to deliver Sustainable Development Goals, there is a sense of urgency for the world to look for solutions, to resume and even scale up financing for Sustainable Development Goals, to mitigate the negative impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, and to recover in an inclusive, greener, and resilient manner. Where can we find answers to such a challenge? According to UNCTAD estimate, SDG-designated investment into specific SDG sectors directly is only about 1.2 to 1.3 trillion, and bypassing largely developing regions and LDC countries. However, the potential market of making investment to be SDG-aligned and responsible would have a value of about $29 trillion. So obviously, the answer largely lies there. And also in the meanwhile, with Global South increases its share of global FDI outputs, we can confidently say part of the answer also lies in the Global South, especially in South-South investment, in promising emerging markets. So that's why the series of workshops we have been discussing this topic. The first seminar, we have discussed the global trends, analyzed challenges, and put forward some important recommendations, including nurturing a global ecosystem for responsible investment, engaging all stakeholders to jointly own and collectively engage in policies, regulations, and disclosure frameworks, including ESG integration. We also hear recommendations on promoting international policy dialogues to incorporate knowledge, experiences, and realities of developing economies to promote more operationality of ESG frameworks. Strengthening knowledge sharing and capacity development is the key. That is important for developing economies to be better harmonizing with international practice and also support innovations in this area. We talked about addressing the digital divide to leverage the advantage of digital transformation to facilitate ESG disclosure and data collection. Just name a few of the important recommendations. We'll resume the dialogue today through today's session, focusing on policy perspectives to dialogue on how to build such an enabling policy environment and ecosystem for SDG-aligned investment. We will hear from distinguished speakers from the United Nations system in China, from Peking University, Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, Asia Development Bank, Chinese Academy of Social Science, China Academy of Social Science and CICETE, and Municipal Government of Shenzhen, China. Now, let me first welcome Mr. Adel Abdellatif, Director at Interim of United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation, to give us opening remarks. Mr. Abdellatif was appointed as Director AI in September 2020 for our office. Before joining UNOSSC, Adel Abdellatif served as Deputy Director AI and Senior Strategic Advisor in the Regional Bureau for Arab States in United Nations Development Program. It is an honor to have you, Mr. Abdellatif, and the floor is yours.
Distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to give opening remarks of the second session focusing on policy perspectives as part of online workshop series on resume Sustainable Development Goals, aligned South-South investments beyond COVID-19, which is organized jointly by the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation, China International Center for Economic and Technical Exchanges, and the Finance Center for South-South Cooperation under the framework of the Global South-South Development Center project. COVID-19 has triggered significant economic recession and financial turmoil in many economies, which brings pressing challenges to achieve SDGs on time in 2030. One major concern for Southern economies in the face of increased demands for financing in the health sector is the debt crisis. As a matter of fact, even prior to the pandemic, this has been a challenge. Before the pandemic, 44% LDCs and other LICs were already at high debt risk or in debt distress, and 25% public revenue were used for debt payments in frontier economies. According to the 2020 Financing for Sustainable Development report, public debt will rise further in response to the pandemic. Therefore, it is critical to assess how the pandemic has exacerbated debt accumulation risks, how it might stifle development in the long run without concerted reform efforts, and what risks are linked to asset purchase programs as a monetary policy tool in emerging market and developing economies. Based on current situations, there is an urgent need to further enhance South-South cooperation involving new, improved financial ties and the promotion of innovative investment climates through SDG-aligned investment incentives. Against this background, this session and this webinar series will contribute to share knowledge on this important agenda. It is crucial for policymakers to maintain a sustainable recovery, gradually moving from income-supporting policies toward policies that promote development. Environmental, social, and governance, ESG, investing is a holistic approach that considers environmental, social, and governance factors in addition to financial ones. Policy options that promote a more stable and resilient financial framework that better serves the SDGs and aids in the COVID-19 Building Back Better recovery are critical. These include supporting development of financial instruments for innovative and social sustainability, promoting technical cooperation and capacity building, providing ESG investors with incentives such as tax benefits for SDG-themed financial products, promoting gender-lens investing, capitalizing on blended finance, and strengthen institutional and regulatory frameworks. To face challenges associated with COVID-19, South-South cooperation and partnership among all stakeholders has proved to be a crucial international development modality. South-South cooperation has expanded in recent years, including policy and intergovernmental process, cooperation in finance, investment and trade, knowledge and good practice sharing, and capacity building. The United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation is the focal point for promoting and facilitating South-South and triangular cooperation for development on a global and United Nations system-wide basis. A recent milestone in leveraging South-South and triangular cooperation toward achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals is the development of the United Nations system-wide strategy on South-South and triangular cooperation. This strategy was finalized in 2020 under the coordination and supervision of the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation, together with over 30 UN entities and 15 resident coordinators. The United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation is also a knowledge hub. I would like to take this opportunity to encourage and welcome our partners to use the platforms for sharing knowledge and good practices on South-South and Triangle cooperation. The three platforms include South-South Galaxy, South-South Global Thinkers, and the Global South-South Development Expo. I wish you great success in your discussions.
I have the great honor to invite Mr. Chetterjee Changqi-de 先生, United Nations Resident Coordinator in China. Mr. Chatterjee took office as the UNRC in China in January 2021. Most recently, he also served as UNRC in Kenya, Regional Director for Middle East and Europe for UNOPS in Denmark, and Chief of Staff in the United Nations Assistance Mission for Iraq. So with deep insight in public policy making and leadership role to coordinate and guide the UN system in China, advancing the achievement of SDGs globally, it is a great honor for us to have you today, sir. What are the key policy messages you would like to share with us? Mr. Chatterjee, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Grace, and let me acknowledge the presence of Professor Justin Lin, who I greatly admire and have admired him for many, many years, one of the top economists that I've ever known. With that, let me first say that the United Nations Secretary General selected me as the UN Resident Coordinator to China, and I feel deeply privileged with this assignment. I'm excited by the prospect of working with the government of China and other stakeholders, including academia, where Professor Justin Lin sits, the private sector, non-governmental organizations, and the people of China to advance the sustainable development within the country and to support China's leadership in global health, peace, and development, and perhaps more particularly, what is most important to the United Nations system is the 2030 agenda. Now, China's leadership is truly an example to the world. Within 40 years, the astounding progress in human development, China is not only on track of eradicating all forms of poverty, it has turned into the second largest global economy and perhaps catching up as the #1 economy very soon. All nations have much to learn from China about delivering on the commitments made in the UN Sustainable Development Goals. In the last 7 years, we have seen China lifted over 90 million people out of abject poverty, and that is a direction which many, many countries in the global south could benefit from. China's leadership across national boundaries, China understands that success is bound up with the success of the world and vice versa. And that, I believe, is why China is an outstanding partner in South-South cooperation, not least in Africa. It shows solidarity in the fight against climate change and global pandemics and pursues international projects, particularly the Belt and Road Initiative. China's leadership is also more remarkable now considering the stresses that COVID-19 pandemic has placed on global partnerships. Rather than shirk from international cooperation, China proposes to expand its role. This point was raised in a January 2021 white paper by the China International Development Cooperation Agency, or CICETE. The paper points to the value of investments in multilateralism and humanitarian support. The SDGs, ladies and gentlemen, are not just a pleasant idea. Their fulfillment is essential to the flourishing and ultimately the survival of all humanity. We have 10 years left for the 2030 deadline. What we do in this time, dubbed as the decade of action, will have lasting ramifications for the people and the planet. China has the will, the resources, and the experience to contribute to the 2030 agenda. The United Nations is keen to have China as a leading partner in this world historical endeavor. I too bring my personal experiences spanning continents and causes to this fight. So as I take up my position in China, I see several areas of fruitful cooperation between China and the United Nations. Firstly, the COVID-19 recovery and long-lasting global health system that we need to put in place. Infrastructure and education in China and around the world. The green economy, focusing on the digital divide. multilateralism and the SDGs, South-South cooperation specifically with Africa, and above and most importantly, SDG 5, which is about gender equality and women's rights. China's response, ladies and gentlemen, to the COVID-19 pandemic, a once in a lifetime, once in a century worldwide health crisis, has been commendable and meritorious on all counts. It has gone beyond domestic solutions to help others with the global shortage of health supplies. Kenya, where I've just concluded my service as the UN resident coordinator, was one of the 53 African countries to receive essential medical supplies. In Ethiopia, China has already supported the construction of the headquarters of the Africa Centers for Disease Center and Prevention, which also responds to future challenges, including novel pathogens. China has been at the forefront as enshrined in the Sustainable Development Goal number 3, which is on universal health coverage. Speaking at the World Health Assembly in May 2020, President Xi Jinping talked about a consolidated international response in ensuring global health. He also pledged that any vaccines developed and deployed by China would be offered as a global public good, a promise they have kept. In an expression of global solidarity, he called for supporting the World Health Organization, helping Africa, and strengthening international cooperation. With my colleagues in China, I will work with partners to assess the broader socio-economic impact of COVID-19 to apply lessons learned to the government's future programming and recovery efforts. These lessons will assist other countries during the recovery phase to build back stronger, to build back better, to build back greener. Other countries are already emulating China's work on community-based surveillance systems, effective triage through primary healthcare, deployment of health workers to meet frontline needs, and ensuring safety and discovering and deploying COVID-19 vaccines. With its disproportionate and deadly impact on the older people, the pandemic has shown that we must fundamentally rethink how we see and treat older people in our rapidly aging societies. As countries adjust to changing demographic realities, they need to make sure that their populations stay active and healthy, starting from a young age. China has valuable lessons to share with its integrated life cycle approach to population aging. To achieve the SDGs in any one country, let alone in all countries, we need to work on a large scale. Working on a big scale requires at least two things: infrastructure and systemic change in education. China is a global leader in both areas and offers lessons and concrete support to the entire world. In infrastructure, the jobs that come with it, China's leadership is without parallel. The Belt and Road Initiative furthers China's importance as a model for developing countries. The BRI builds on one of the most extraordinary successes of humankind's history, raising over 850 million people out of poverty. The BRI can also help other countries take advantage of China's depth of experience in addition to financing. Indeed, the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, once said about the BRI, it could contribute to a more equitable, prosperous world in reversing the negative impact of climate change. I have seen, ladies and gentlemen, firsthand how these partnerships have transformed parts of northern Kenya. A spectacular highway built in record time connecting Isiolo town in Kenya to Ethiopia, constructed by a Chinese state company, funded by the Africa Development Bank, the European Union, and the Kenyan government. This road is part of the Lamu Port, South Sudan, Ethiopia Transport Corridor, or LAPSET. It is proving central to the regional integration and unlocking economic potential to the entire Eastern African region. Most importantly, this road has reduced travel time, distance between Nairobi and Moyale, a town on the Kenya-Ethiopia border, to 7 hours. Previously, the travel on this route was torturous, with days spent on unforgiving, bumpy terrain. The SGR in Kenya. The Mombasa National Standard Gauge Railway connects Mombasa to the largest port in East Africa and Nairobi, the capital city of Kenya. One of the biggest infrastructure projects to be carried out in Kenya, the SGR line supports passenger and cargo transportation. I have traveled that road, and this 480-kilometer line now shortens passenger travel time from Mombasa to Nairobi, which used to take more than 10 hours, to about 4 hours. Freight trains complete the journey in less than 8 hours. These partnerships between the public and private sector will be key to Africa's real economic potential. Such economic growth will also help not only Africans, but the world over. China has shown itself to be a shining example and a generous partner in pursuit of international development. In education too, China's work is exemplary. This work is not a piecemeal effort, but rather a systemic expansion of education nationwide, offering the world great food for thought. Education and training was part and parcel of the country's reform and provided much needed human capital to propel sustained social and economic development. Over the last 4 decades, China has universalized 9-year compulsory education and eradicated adult literacy. Gross enrollment rates in the senior secondary levels went from 29% to 78%, with higher education levels going from 4% to about 40% in the last 3 decades. China's education system has evolved by blending its cultural heritage with Western-style learning. China provides skilled labor and researchers for the world, yet avoids brain drains due to favorable production and local employment policies. Professional development of teachers in China is well integrated with the school curriculum. All these in the education sector are proving to be absolutely spectacular in the way we are creating a new generation of human capital. China's work in education is all the more remarkable given our current global crisis. Earlier last year, when COVID-19 was still a challenge, the country demonstrated how to continue providing quality education, efficiently switching to online learning. The government also implemented several policies to support business productivity in a safe and coordinated manner. It stimulated the economy to ensure job security, especially for vulnerable people. Now, China's experience in infrastructure and demonstration the value of going big and at scale. 2020 marked the 75th year of the United Nations. The time to recommit to coming together in global solidarity is now. Not next month or next year, but now. And again, indeed, multilateralism is the lodestar, which we must constantly return to. It is not achieved once and for all. Our ongoing efforts are required to refresh it constantly, renew it constantly, absolutely have a move towards the spirit of multilateralism. We need to make sure this crisis doesn't stop us from reviving multilateralism or achieving the 2030 agenda. China, as a member state, a leader of the G77, a permanent member of the UN Security Council, has a vital role in this renewal. This need rings especially true in Africa, where the challenges and the opportunities are immense. With over 75 million people displaced around the world, fleeing conflict, instability, climate change, and poverty, the Secretary General Antonio Guterres once said, the world is in pieces and we need world peace. China, a peacekeeping powerhouse, is responding to it. It is in the top 10 troop contributing countries and the second largest donor to the UN peacekeeping budget. A recent white paper on 30 years of Chinese peacekeeping, making the essential point that development must accompany peacekeeping. Without these two actions happening in lockstep, often the pieces remain. Ever since the reopening to the world economy, China's significance in global governance has grown exponentially. The country is now leading a renaissance in multilateralism. In recent foreign policy discourse, we've seen Chinese voice in global leadership and representation in international institutions. China is engaging actively in regional fora, global institutions like the UN, the G20, ASEAN, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the BRICS. Its role in the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and the New Development Bank also epitomizes the administration's determination to place China at the heart of the reforms of the global governance and economic governance system. The Chinese approach to development based on infrastructure development, universal health coverage, educational exchanges, intellectual connectivity in conjunction with the private sector is advancing prosperity and is compatible to the UN's best practices. China is a country of great promise, ladies and gentlemen, in global leadership and acceleration of the Sustainable Development Goals. As the UN resident coordinator, I will work with China not only to help achieve the SDGs here, but in advancing South-South cooperation. Making China's bilateral and multilateral aid work better for development countries is one of my central aspirations. In the United Nations in Kenya, the SDG Public-Private Partnership Platform was established in 2017 under my leadership. Now there, an American company, Merck, a British company, GSK, a Chinese company, Huawei, a Kenyan company, Safaricom, a European company, Philips from the Netherlands, we were able to bring them together to harness big data technology and innovation. Likewise, we were able to utilize public-private partnerships in terms of this UN Development Assistance Framework in Kenya. As McKinsey and the company recently wrote, that China has a significant force in Africa's development and substantially increasing commitments and engagements over the last few years. Pragmatism argues for moving that discussion ahead to how China's involvement can reap benefits for Africa and China. Now, China's readiness also to engage with the Africa Free Trade Area to boost trade and cooperation and the digital economy has been significant. I have seen the impact that we've had when these companies came together in reducing maternal mortality in some of the highest burden counties in Kenya. I will work with the UN agencies, funds, and programs in China to support the government in achieving the sustainable development and assisting the development countries, particularly in Africa, to grow their economies and livelihoods. During the high-level roundtable on South-South cooperation held in 2015, at the UN headquarters, China announced the 6 100s plans, and these plans are being unraveled very effectively. So many parts of Africa are affected by the egregious effects of climate change, poverty, instability. The continents are not just victims of a burden of other countries. Africans have talent, expertise, and drive. They have rich cultural, historical, economic, natural, and human resources. They are equal partners in the development path. By 2050, Africa's population will be 2.5 billion, with over 850 million young people. But realizing Africa's demographic dividend, we have to invest in Africa's human development, human capital, economic growth now. It is prudent to accept China's role in Africa. It is also time for China to enhance that role. And there will be no progress, ladies and gentlemen, without an investment in gender equality and women's rights, who will be central to the pillars of advancing the nation state's economic engines. As a strong believer in gender equality, I look forward to continuing my advocacy in this critical pathway. China's push to prioritize gender equality and women's empowerment in its global cooperation priorities, as indicated in the recent CICETE paper, is most welcome. Progress here in China will be an engine for economic growth in Africa and the rest of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude by saying that the economic upheaval caused by the COVID-19 pandemic rivals the Great Depression of the 1930s. As President Xi reminded us in his special address at the World Economic Forum on the 25th of January 2021, the pandemic is far from over. The recent resurgence of COVID cases remind us that we must carry on the fight. Yet we remain convinced that winter cannot stop the arrival of spring, and darkness can never shroud the light of dawn. There is no doubt humanity will prevail over the virus and emerge even stronger from the disaster. The UN and international organizations have an important and challenging role in responding to the pandemic. Amidst the terrible impact of COVID-19, there is an opportunity. There is a reason for countries and the world to come together for the SDGs, to create a plan of action for people, planet, and prosperity. The challenges facing the world now are as complex and intertwined, requiring complex solutions. As I start my new role as the resident coordinator in China, there are merely 10 years left for the world to keep its promise of meeting the SDGs, which must be, 2021 must be the harbinger of hope and for global cooperation to regain momentum in achieving the SDGs. Now is the time to unite and to align our efforts as we move swiftly into the decade of action. I look forward to leading the United Nations country team in China, continuing to champion the UN values, the 2030 agenda, in partnership with the government of China. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chatterjee, for such an inspiring, impactful, and highly motivating message to open our seminar. Thank you so much for highlighting the importance of renewed and strengthened multilateralism. Today, I have the honor to have Professor Justin Lin. Justin Lin Yifu is Dean of Institute of New Structural Economists, Dean of Institute of South-South Cooperation and Development, and Professor and Honorable Dean of National School of Development at Peking University. I know that he doesn't need any introduction. People all know him as the famous leading economist and the former senior vice president and chief economist of the World Bank, He's also counselor of the State Council and a member of the Standing Committee, Chinese People's Political Consultation Conference. Professor Lin, beyond all this, has also allocated his precious time and invaluable knowledge to support the international community to dialogue on South-South cooperation and SDG issues. Professor Lin is a steering committee member of the Global Coalition of Think Tank Networks for South-South Cooperation, South-South Global Thinkers, which is an initiative jointly supported by our office and UNDP, involving over 250 think tanks across the world. So Professor Lin, it is a real honor to have you today to be our lead speaker. And Professor Lin, the floor is yours.
Grace, thank you very much for your kind introduction. And it's a great honor for me to speak after Ambassador Chatterjee with his very inspiring speech. And as we know, now only 10 years left for us to achieve the SDGs. However, the world currently is hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's a great setback for us to achieve these ambitious goals of SDG. Currently, already 3.1 million people die of this pandemic. And according to the World Bank estimation, August last year, about 100 million people may fall back to the extreme poverty because of pandemic. And with the lingering of this pandemic, I think the cost will be even higher. However, the pandemic will go eventually. And so we need to double our effort to realize the SDG after this pandemic. And from what I see, two important goals can be considered as the mean to achieve other SDG. The first one is goal 9, industrialization, innovation, and infrastructure. Because with industrialization, then decent job will be provided. With income, they will have fun for their own food. Then hunger can be eliminated as well. And also with income, they will take care of their own health. So we can also achieve goal 3. Certainly education, goal 4 is important. But with industrialized job, people will have more incentive to acquire education as well as to pay for education. So from what I see, industrialization is the foundation to achieve many SDG goals. But we know with industrialization, emission will be increased. Pollution will be worsened. So we also need to take care of the goal 13, that's climate action. And so industrialization needs to be carried out in a new way, that is green industrialization. We need to have the new technology that allow people to use solar power, wind power, hydropower, those kind of renewable energies. And for the developing country, first, we need to make this kind of technology available. We also need to make this technology that renewable, accessible, and affordable. And from this regard, I think South-South cooperation is especially important, because if we see the successful industrialization experiences in the past, in general, they follow the so-called flying geese pattern in the industrialization process. The high-income country, after they raise their income, they will migrate to high value added industries, and they will relocate those kind of more labor intensive industries to other lower income countries, and which are consistent with the competitive advantages of the low income developing countries, and which can generate substantial amount of jobs. And in this regard, China is one country I often say can be a very important source for industrialization in other countries. Because as we know, China started with a very low income status when China started the journey of transition from a planned economy to a market economy in 1978. And with the labor intensive oriented industrialization, now China is very close to a high income country, and China will have to migrate those kind of labor intensive industry to other countries. And in other occasion I mentioned, China will provide about 85 million jobs in the labor intensive industries, and which is almost sufficient to help the country in South Asia, country in Central Asia, country in Africa to kickstart their industrialization. But certainly, to make industrialization possible, infrastructure is needed. And the Belt and Road Initiative, with its focus on infrastructure connectivities, will also contribute to the realization of the industrialization in many southern countries. But certainly, China or any country alone will not be able to achieve these SDG goals. So we need to have global effort. Other higher income developing countries can play the same role as China to assist other low income developing countries to kickstart their industrialization, as well as we need to have multilateral development institutions to provide funding for infrastructure as well as the green technologies. And bilateral development institutions from higher income countries can also help in this industrialization process with the improvement of infrastructure and accessibility of green technology. We also need to revise the debt sustainability assessment, because currently the criterion for debt sustainability assessment only without make a difference between the debt for consumption or debt for investment. And developing countries are in need of great investment in infrastructure to kickstart their industrialization. So the multilateral development institution like IMF should reconsider their framework for debt sustainability and allowing the developing country to issue bonds, and especially green bonds, for their infrastructure, for their access to green technology in order to make the industrialization possible, and for job, for income, and for achieving other, the SDG goals. But at the same time, the high-income country not only can provide funds, the advanced countries are the most important markets for the industrial product from the developing country, especially those kind of consumption type, labor-intensive products. And so the high-income countries should open their market for the developing countries' products. And so we need to further promote the industrialization, and especially the green industrialization and the green globalization. Certainly, the challenge is huge, but as Mr. Chalaji mentioned, if we have a will, we have a way, and if you work together, no matter how challenging the job is, I think we can overcome it and we can come back strong, come back green, come back sustainable. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Lin. I'm sure that we all hear very informative and inspiring thoughts that you have shared with us. You have shared with us the green industrial pathways, access to green technology, the importance of basic infrastructure, and the multilateral institutions need to do a lot to support such a policy environment. The criteria for sustainability assessment needs to be updated to allow developing countries better engage as meaningful contributors. The global north also has a role to play, very important. So thank you very much for bringing all these dimensions together into this thinking around what are the policy messages and how do we work together to build such an environment for developing countries and developed countries to work together towards a greener, sustainable development pathway. Thank you very much, Professor Lin. Next, following these two very inspirational remarks, we have speakers from development banks. Mr. Basu, we welcome your presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Xiaojun, and very good morning and very good evening to all participants, distinguished guests. I will start, the content of my presentation is part about the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which I am representing. You all know that this is a very new bank. It was established in 2015-16. We don't claim to be toddlers anymore. We are now a young bank. And one of the purpose of my presentation would be to share the perspective of the bank in terms of the SDGs. And this is divided into two parts really. The first part talks about how the Asian Infrastructure Bank has viewed these sustainable development goals and how we have developed our own architecture of the sustainable development goal. And the second part would be, I will go a little back and forth on the Millennium Development Goal, the Sustainable Development Goal, and the future perspective. Because we believe that the development priorities change over time, over different period of time. The Millennium Development Goal had certain goals which was driven by the priorities of that time period. The Sustainable Development Goal was driven by the Paris Agreement and some of the development priorities of that period. And then we have a future. And the future is determined by the developments which are happening now, most significantly the COVID, and how to get out of it, and how to keep the economy up and running. So this is a very brief introduction to the historical perspective. The entire thing started with the Rio +20. Then we had the Addis conference where we had the Sustainable Development Goal, the Paris Agreement, and then the global initiative. Very remarkably, two new multilateral development bank has come into picture. One is the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank located in Beijing, and the other one was the New Development Bank located in Shanghai. I represent the AIIB. Now, in our understanding of the Sustainable Development Goal, the first 6 goals which you see over here are actually compressed form of the erstwhile Millennium Development Goal. And from 7 to 15, the goals which has been derived after the Addis conference are the climate compatible growth goals, which are primarily linked to climate change, sustainability, so on and so forth. And the last 2 goals are actually the enablers. These are the common denominators for all the goals to succeed. Now, to give you a brief picture of how this architecture has been developed within the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Now, before that, this is how the SDGs has been viewed. I mean, from 1 to 15, these are the goals which we are supposed to be achieving, not in terms of attribution, but how much we contribute in achieving this goal. SDG 10 and 12 are the common denominators, and SDG 16 and 17 are the enablers. This is basically partnership and the funds. Now, how SDGs are relevant to our work in the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. In terms of the investment bucket, there are 4 key areas where we put our funds, and that is water, energy, industry, innovation and infrastructure, and the urban. These are the 4 areas where our investments are going to. This is supported by the sustainability goals, and these are like labor, environment, social, those kind of issues. In order for the infrastructure investments to succeed, it is important that we do proper due diligence of the project and ensure sustainability. And in order to ensure sustainability, we do environment and social due diligence through these 4 goals, 8, 10, 12, 13, 14, and 15, to see that this investment which we are making will ultimately be sustainable. Of course, there is a very strong issue of partnership, and partnership doesn't only mean global partnership, but also local partnership. Take all stakeholders into consideration and then build a partnership for development. And finally, we have the funds. After doing all this, these are the economic development goals that we achieve. So the investment and the sustainability due diligence leads to these economic development. We reduce poverty, hunger, and promote health and education. And of course, we contribute to gender equality. Now, when we do the programming in the field at the operation level, gender can sometimes be the output of our investment, which is to say that once we make this investment, women tend to benefit out of it. But sometimes gender is the input also. Women contribute to achieve the development goal, that is the economic development outcomes which we have envisaged over here. Now, one thing which I would like to tell you is that post the COVID situation, this architecture has changed a little bit, because AIIB is now investing in health. Primarily, it's called social development, but primarily we have started with health, a little bit on education, but we are planning to respond to the COVID crisis in a big way and looking at health as a bucket for our investment programs. Now, there are, we all know that the SDGs are, the significant feature of the SDG is cross-connectivity. I mean, if you look at water, if you look at the urban, if you look at energy, these are all, there is a common theme, a thematic linkage between all this. The indicators which you have in water are also linked with the indicators which you have in, let's say, infrastructure and industry, in urban areas, in affordable energy, so on and so forth. I'm not going into the nitty-gritties of this interconnectivity, but what I mean to say is that when you invest in one of the sustainability development goal, once you contribute to one of the sustainability development goal, it automatically promotes some other goals with which it is interlinked. Now, I have picked up one sustainability development goal, which is water, which is closest to my heart. And I have shown that each one of the indicators of the SDG 6, clean water and sanitation, is linked to the other sustainability development goals. That is, if you are achieving one of the indicators of SDG 6, you are automatically contributing to another sustainable development goal. It is there. I am not reading out these things. I hope you will circulate this. But having said so, I would like to go a little bit back and forth on the issue of developmental priorities. Now, developmental priorities over the last 40 years have changed. You know, sometimes poverty and health has been the key priorities. Sometimes climate change has been the key priorities. And it is time for us to visualize what would be the key development priorities in the future times to come. Now, if you look at MDGs, say for instance, MDG 7. MDG 7 had 4 indicators: afforestation, ozone depletion, carbon dioxide emission, biodiversity loss, drinking water and sanitation, improvements in the life of slum dwellers. Now, please notice over here that water and drinking water and sanitation, which was an indicator of MDG 7, you know, which was subsumed under MDG 7, has become a priority goal in Sustainable Development Goal, in SDG. You know, I remember at that time I used to work for UNICEF as a water specialist, and we used to struggle to report on our achievement because there was no space. For instance, biodiversity loss, which used to be subsumed under environmental sustainability MDG 7, has now become an independent sustainability goal. And in this context, I am sure that as we strive towards achieving the SDG targets by 2030, we should also start thinking about what the future holds for us. And in that context, I would like to put forth some of the ideas which can be critical for our development priorities of the future. For instance, digital platform is becoming a very important goal, development goal for the development community to think about and achieve. It is contributing to public health security. People are getting medicines through the digital platform. People are getting health services. People are getting education once they are confined to their, you know, whatever house or anything. Even employment is being generated digitally. It is contributing to poverty alleviation. It is also contributing to access to clean energy. So digital platform will become a very important top-line development priority in the future. The second one, which I foresee could be a very important development goal for the development community, is cross-border connectivity. Now, cross-border connectivity will slowly emerge as a top-line development priority for the development community, and we should be thinking about this very seriously in order to ensure that communities and goods can move seamlessly across regions and contribute to economies, particularly those economies which will be badly hit by COVID or any other disaster that might hit us. I mean, COVID is a pandemic, but apart from COVID, we are also vulnerable to a large number of disasters induced by climate change. You know, this recurrent floods and hurricanes and tornadoes and all this stuff is creating havoc and floods and droughts particularly in South Asia. Now, in order to address to these emerging challenges, we need to ensure that people, goods, and services can seamlessly move across geographies. The third development priority which I feel is very important for our purpose, is disaster risk management. We will have to spend a lot of time on this. And it is not limited to COVID. It is also expanding to climate change. And the impacts of climate change are not going to go away in the next 10 years. We will have droughts, we will have floods, we will have issues of reduced agricultural productivity, we will have issues of adequate energy supply to the less developed economies. And in that context, we really have to think about how to manage the disasters and address the well-being of human kind in across the globe. We are shifting to renewables. We are reducing fossil fuels. We are taking several climate mitigation and adaptation steps while we develop our infrastructure. But while we are doing all these things, we have to keep in mind that everything is converging to the ultimate purpose of addressing the key issue of disaster and emergency risk. I will pause here. This was a brief account of what we had to say on behalf of Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. And if you have questions, I'll be happy to respond. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Basu. Thank you for sharing with us the AIIB experiences in taking into your investment priorities and assessment framework the interlinkages between SDGs, and also sharing your insightful proposals of priorities moving forward on digital platforms, cross-border connectivity, and disaster risk management. These will be very important dimensions for more thoughts to be exchanged during this webinar and beyond. Thank you very much. Now I would like to welcome from another development bank, Asia Development Bank, Ms. Hisaka Kimura, advisor on Private Sector Operations Department, to share with us SDG-aligned private sector project under COVID-19. What are the lessons learned from ADB-funded project?
Thank you so much.
Yes, Ms. Kimura has over 25 years of experience in arranging finance for energy, natural resources, water, and municipal environmental infrastructure projects in various countries. Earlier in her career, she also worked for European Bank of Reconstruction and Development and Ernst & Young in London. So thank you very much, and we look forward to hear from you, Ms. Kimura.
Thank you so much for having me today. I'm very pleased to be here to introduce our SDG-aligned private sector project under COVID-19. Why private sector? Current pandemic has impact on many fronts of pathway to achieve SDG. It's changed the financial landscape too. Public debt in emerging market has surged to level not seen in 50 years, yet there is a huge financial gap to make the SDG a reality. Developing countries in Asia and the Pacific would need 1.7 trillion annually and a broad range of solutions, including private sectors, to meet the goals. With relying more on private sector, we believe government can free up significant amount of fund to its critical expenditure related to pandemic response. Asian Development Bank is a regional multilateral development bank owned by 68 member countries with over 55 years track record in the region. In 2020, last year, our commitment included substantial and much needed support for COVID-19 response. About half of total commitment of 31.6 billion was for long-term development issues such as addressing climate change, and investing in high quality infrastructure. Our approach is to align our strategy and operations, directly finance and mobilize additional finance for the project, particularly from the private sector and domestic resources. We aim to attract commercial banks and institutional investors to areas that they otherwise would not consider. I'll deep dive in this a bit later. And support knowledge, capacity development, and also dialogue with member countries to catalyze actions. And partnership is very important to foster policy dialogue and also monitor progress in the region. ADB integrated the SDG and associated target into the long-term strategy 2030 through our 7 operational priorities. First, addressing remaining poverty and reducing inequality. Second, accelerating progress in gender equality. Third, tracking climate change. Fourth, making city more livable. Fifth, promoting rural development and food security. Sixth, strengthening the governance and institutional capacity. And lastly, fostering regional cooperation and integration. As mentioned earlier, we at ADB directly finance projects that help the member countries achieve the SDG. How do we select such project? We take a tailor-made approach. We map out the subsectors, reach out to a wide range of companies, and visit the candidate one by one to select a project with high development impact and additionality. Here are 5 questions which we first ask. Where is the project located? Will project contribute to inclusive growth in rural area or regional initiatives such as Blue Ocean? Who owns the project? Will the project compete fairly in the market? Is the project financially viable? How will the project perform under different scenarios? How will project contribute to development goals? This is perhaps one of the most important questions. What are the project main impact outcomes and output? Lastly, standard. Will the project sponsor be willing to work together with ADB to improve environmental, social, gender, and governance standards? Following the pandemic, ADB actively responded to COVID-19 outbreaks through finance, knowledge, and partnership. In private sector, we provided the emergency loan to support the company which deliver crucial medical and personal protection goods such as mask, suit, face shield in epicenters. In Wuhan and other cities under lockdown, we supported also sustainable energy supply. Liquefied natural gas was main energy to build and run temporary hospital in addition to households which are not connected to the city gas grid. We also took a framework approach to cover all countries of operation through supply chain finance program. In addition, we worked with commercial banks to multiply impact by mobilizing co-finance. I'd like to also mention what happened during lockdown soon after COVID-19 pandemic for our existing project under implementation. Mixed impact on energy sector. For example, energy demand decreased significantly for industry use during lockdown, and some projects faced renegotiation on offtake and tariff payment. On the other hand, many city governments identified water and wastewater industry as essential and let operate even during lockdown with minimum critical staff on site. Digital solution played very important role, not only operation, but also customer interfaces such as invoicing and payment. ADB has been financing the project with advanced technology, and indeed those technology helped water and wastewater project continue essential service during lockdown. We observe some adjustment, such as additional support to vulnerable people with free water, enhanced staff security and safety, increased quality testing frequently and also locations. And we continue financing new investment opportunity to upgrade the existing water plant to meet higher quality standard and test solution to prepare for next wave of pandemic. In my last slide, I'd like to emphasize that SDG is not just achieving, but sustaining, and resilience jumped up the agenda following COVID-19. The pandemic demonstrated that some excellent infrastructure can come under significant strain during unexpected factors, such as supply chain and logistic disruption caused delay in construction and maintenance, and also unexpected demand fluctuation, in particular industry and commercial user, and longer lead time to obtain government approval and licenses, and end user payment moratorium, some deferred bill payment, which may cause increasing working capital requirements. We will keep helping raise awareness of resilience plan so that utility can be ready for any unexpected event. And then we will support capacity development to respond to wide range of risk. I'd like to conclude by thanking you for your commitment to achieving the SDG through this joint effort. ADB will continue to support effort to localize the SDG across the region, working with wide range of stakeholders. And knowledge sharing is very important in this journey. I look forward to opportunity to exchange view with you again soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Kimura-san. Thank you for sharing with us ADB experiences. As you said, knowledge is so important, and only when it's shared is powerful. Thank you very much for sharing your knowledge with from ADB-supported private sector projects. Now we have heard global perspectives, policy messages, regional experiences as well. I would like to introduce the next speaker, who will bring to us from the Chinese perspective, environmental regulations and policies in the context of green development and investment. So this is Ms. He Jingjing, Associate Professor from Institute of International Law, Chinese Academy of Social Science. Ms. He is currently working in social science. She is also Deputy Secretary General of the Belt and Road Judicial Base under the Supreme Court of China. Her research focuses on Chinese and international environmental law, climate change law, low carbon emission, and emission reduction law. So, Ms. He, we look forward to hear from you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And it has been a great honor to join this great seminar. Today, given the time limit, I'm going to concentrate my talk on the following issues. First, I would like to give a brief introduction of China's environmental regulations and policies. I would like to focus on the environmental law and also the green principle of civil code. And next, I'm going to talk about China's commitment to fight against climate change. And I would like to draw people's attention to China's pledge to UNOSSC and the achievements we have made. And lastly, I would like to talk about the Belt and Road Initiative, especially the green principle, because I know the previous people have, professors have talked about the investment from development banks, and also Justin Lin and also other officials have talked about the issue. But I would like to say a little bit differently from the legal perspective. I'd like to emphasize the importance of green principle. And now I would like, first of all, to talk about the China's environmental law. As you may know that China has revised the environmental law and has implemented the new law in 2015. Although it's not that new, but it has been a great leap in China's progress in the legislation of environment law protection. And we call this law a law with teeth because compared to the previous environmental law and other laws, this law has legal weapons which equip us to punish the polluters. This law, as I said earlier on, took effect in China in January 2015. It showed China's great attempt to harmonize economic, social, and environmental protection. And this one great characteristics is that China, in this law, we have harsher punishments to environmental wrongdoing. And we could fine companies on a daily basis if they ignore the advice from the government or if they ignore the rulings of the court. So basically what we're saying that if the companies continue doing harm to the environment, they will suffer severely in terms of fines. And another great feature is in China's environmental law, we have this environmental public interest litigation, which is kind of innovation because in China, to encourage public interest litigation, it's not that easy. However, in order to equip the NGOs to help to file suit against environmental wrongdoings, we have equipped them with this legal weapon, which is really a great achievement for China and also a contribution to the rule of law in the world. And also in this law, we encourage a green and sustainable lifestyle among citizens. We encourage people to follow a greener lifestyle. And now, as you may know, that in China, we are asked to sort our rubbish, so which really help to better the environment. And also in China, we have emphasized the importance of having the environmental impact statement, or we say environment evaluation for any construction project. So we have attached the importance of precautionary measures to ensure that we don't do any harm to the environment. So this is the China's environmental law, which is a big progress in terms of legislation. And also one thing I would definitely like to draw your attention to is the recent development of civil code. As you may know that this year we welcome the arrival of civil code and we start to follow the civil code, which is a great achievement in terms of civil laws. And one good achievement of civil code is that we emphasized the green principle, which is one of the basic principles of civil code. We emphasize the importance of environmental protection and sustainable development in civil activities. I think this is also shows China's wisdom and a contribution to the world's civil law, because traditionally, we think civil law and environmental law belong to different arenas. But in China, because we really want to protect the environment, protect the natural resources, and to follow the green development, so we embed this important green principle to civil code. So from property law to contract law to tort, it covers all aspects of civil code, which is definitely something to give credit to. And then I would like to talk some about China's commitment to fight against climate change. As you may know, that China has been working very hard to fight against climate change. And the story starts from 2014 when China and US joint announcement of climate change issued, which actually helped with the world negotiation for the Paris Agreement. And in this announcement, China not only shows its dedication to the global collaboration for climate change, but also has a pledge to reach certain goals by 2030, especially promised to reduce carbon emissions and reach carbon peak at the latest by 2030, which is great, a commitment, because as you may know that China is one of the largest the carbon emission emitters in the world. And China's commitment actually shows China's great efforts to contribute to the global fight against climate change. And also in this announcement, we can see that it promotes trade in green goods, which I think is also very important, that in terms of world trade, we're trying to encourage green products, which is also a great sign. And later now, I would also like to talk a little bit about China's intended national determined contributions. As we know that now for the global climate change, and we encourage countries to submit to their intended national determined contributions, which is kind of plan and commitment for each individual country. And for China, I think if you have a chance to look at the enhanced actions on climate change, China's intended nationally determined contributions, you can see that not only China commits by 2030 to reach CO2 emission peak, to lower CO2 emissions per unit of GDP by 60 to 65% from the 2005 level, to increase the share of non-fossil fuels in energy consumption to around 20%, and also to increase its forest stock by around 4.5 billion cubic meters against the 2005 level. So those are very concrete targets we have set for ourselves, and and ever since then we have been very committed to make those goals work. Also, I would like to draw your attention to one great, I think, a measure proposed by China. It's green finance, which mentioned that we want to improve the green credit mechanisms to encourage and guide financial institutions to operate energy efficiency crediting business and to issue asset securitized products for green credit assets, of course, and also carbon trade market. So China is utilizing financial mechanisms and the tools to boost our green development and finance, which is, I think, something we are really proud of. And lastly, I would like to talk about the Green Investment Principle and Belt and Road Initiative. Just now, a lot of professors and officials have talked about the investment projects worldwide, especially in the context of South and South collaboration. As you may know that China, thanks to also our banks like AIIB, China has actually conducted quite a lot of Belt and Road Initiative projects worldwide, especially in developing countries. So it's not only boosted the local economic development, but also I think one great principle we have been holding to is Green Investment Principle, which could help to achieve a win-win results, also contribute to the sustainable development of the local country, which I think this is something definitely China is we should give credit to, because I'm from legal perspective. I would like to say that actually, if you look at a lot of projects, at a certain stage, they may go into conflicts. And one of the common factor is environmental harms. So for international arbitration, some of the reasons, especially international investment arbitrations, some of the reasons the harms to the local environment. So I'm so happy to see that in China, we stick to the green investment principle. We ask the companies which invest in the Belt and Road countries to respect the local environmental regulations, and also to make sure that we achieve the balance between economic development and green development, which I think is something we need to encourage in the future, and in the context of South and South collaboration. And I think this is an initiative and also wisdom and contribution by China to the world rule of law and global governance. And thank you very much for your time and attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor He, for sharing Chinese perspective and also introducing a very comprehensive legal framework to ensure investment is green and contributing to SDGs. Thank you very much. Now, let us also hear from investment opportunities perspective. So we will have our next speaker, Mr. Sun Mingchun, Chief Economist of Haitong International Securities Group Limited. Dr. Sun has served as the Chief Economist of Haitong International Security Group Limited since 2019. Prior to that, Dr. Sun served as Asia-China Chief Economist at Daiwa Capital Markets, Nomura International, and Lehman Brothers Asian Limited. He was also a co-founder of asset management companies, Deepwater Capital and China Broad Capital. So Dr. Sun, after all the previous speakers, we would really like to hear from you, your assessment of the ESG investment opportunities in light of the carbon neutrality goal and the global policy innovation for decarbonization. Dr. Sun, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'd like to share with you my thoughts on ESG investment. Just now, Professor He Jingjing have given a very comprehensive legal and policy background about China's fight against climate change. For me, I will basically talking from the perspective of market participants on how ESG investors will contribute to this global campaign. So basically, I'm going to talk about what kind of opportunities and responsibilities that ESG investors can explore during this whole global strive for carbon neutrality. As we all know that as of today, more than 120 countries have announced their goals of achieving carbon neutrality within 3 to 4 decades. The majority of them have committed to achieving the goal by 2050. China also announced the pledge to reach the peak of emission by 2030 and also achieve carbon neutrality by 2060. To me, this is a very ambitious goal. According to my own expectation, China's GDP will likely grow by 60% over the next decade. But China's carbon intensity has to be reduced aggressively in order to limit peak emission at no more than 5% above today's level. So actions must be taken immediately by all lines of business, as well as by households and consumers to achieve these targets. Among the actions to take, China needs to make massive investments in a wide range of areas, such as renewable energy, power grid, electrical vehicles, and supporting infrastructure, as well as in developing new technologies to enhance energy efficiency, emission reduction, carbon capture and storage, etc. Today, about 85% of China's energy consumption depends on fossil fuels. To achieve carbon neutrality by 2060, it is estimated that more than 90% of China's energy uses has to come from renewable resources. Such a sea change in energy structure requires huge amount of investment in related areas. According to some estimates by Chinese think tanks, the total amount of investments needed should be well over 100 trillion RMB, possibly more than 200 trillion RMB by some estimate in the next 4 decades. For ESG investors, the global strive for carbon neutrality presents tremendous investment opportunities. A significant part of the above-mentioned investments would be financed by green loans and green bonds. In China, a new type of green bond, so-called carbon neutrality bond, that finance projects to help reduce carbon emission has been introduced lately. As of mid-April this year, 56 carbon neutrality bonds have been issued, raising a total amount of over 80 billion RMB. In the equity markets, in anticipation of the structural transformation from fossil fuels to renewable energies, global investors have already added significant exposure in sectors such as clean energy, low carbon or zero carbon technologies, as evidenced by hefty returns in related stocks and ETFs, exchange traded funds in both the US and China markets in the past 12 months. Besides new investment opportunities, ESG investors should also pay attention to increasing risks of so-called stranded assets as a result of accelerated global efforts toward carbon neutrality. As traditional fossil fuels are gradually replaced by renewable energies, producers of the former will likely face significant financial challenges, including sharper than expected depreciation or even disposal in the value of stranded assets. Some companies may even go bankrupt if they are not able to transform their business into greener ones quickly or efficiently enough. Investors, including both equity and fixed income investors, may face significant haircuts in the value of the bonds and stocks of these issuers. The concept of stranded assets is not new to ESG investors. In fact, many investors have started disposing assets with such risks, not only for risk control purpose, but also to pressure those issuers to transform into greener businesses. This is part of the intentional functions of ESG investment. Voting by vote may be a good strategy for ordinary investors, but is not the best strategy for ESG investors or for the society. The strategy may create social problems which contradicts the spirits of ESG investment. If investors and financial institutions all walk away from these companies, the latter will not be able to obtain necessary finance to transform their traditional fossil fuel business to greener ones. As a result, they may have to shut down business operations and lay off people. Those being laid off may face significant challenges and hardships in finding new jobs if they do not have the required skills for other business. Therefore, a simplistic vote by vote strategy to help speed up low carbon transformation may create significant social pains, which is against the social dimension of ESG investment principles. To solve this problem, ESG investors should adopt a more constructive and comprehensive approach. Rather than voting by vote, they should engage with companies they invest and provide them with financial and even technical assistance to facilitate their green transformation. Recently, Dr. Zhou Chengjun, the Director General of the Research Institute of the People's Bank of China, introduced the concept of transition finance or transformation finance, which distinguishes from green finance by focusing on the provision of financing to heavy emission entities to assist their transition to greener technologies and greener business models. For ESG investors, this approach is more complicated and time-consuming, but is more meaningful and influential. It is the social responsibility that ESG investors should take. Besides helping and pressuring their investment targets to transform to low carbon business models, ESG investors, including both asset owners and asset managers, should also aim to achieve carbon neutrality in their own business operations as soon as possible. They can adopt internal policies and incentive schemes to advocate the reduce, reuse, recycle practices in the consumption of electricity, fuel, paper, etc. They can also replace high carbon emitting activities such as business trips and bulk printing with alternatives such as video conferences and electronic publications. In addition, they should try to switch to renewable energies as well as new energy vehicles as soon as possible. For emissions unable to be further reduced after taking all these actions, they can purchase carbon credits to offset them. It is worth noting that purchases of carbon credits by ESG investors to offset their remaining emissions will help boost prices of carbon credits and reinforce a virtuous cycle in the adoption of green technologies. Higher prices of carbon credits will act as higher rewards for sellers, most of which are green energy producers, such as solar or wind farm operators, and also companies that have cut emission aggressively to save their carbon quota for sale. Meanwhile, higher prices penalize heavy emission entities who have to purchase carbon credits for their excessive emission. Therefore, both buyers and sellers will have stronger incentives to adopt green technologies in face of higher carbon prices. As more entities adopt green technologies, more carbon credits will be created and supplied to the market. At the same time, less demand will come from carbon buyers if they also adopt green technologies to cut emission. Such healthy dynamics will put a cap on carbon prices and eventually lead to a dynamic equilibrium in the carbon trading markets. To sum up, in a global strive for carbon neutrality, ESG investors should focus on both environmental and social impact of the green transition. They should not just pressure, but also assist their investment targets to transform to low carbon technologies and business models. The global carbon neutrality campaign creates both opportunities and responsibility for ESG investors. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sun, for identifying the opportunities in front of us, but also you have unpacked all these opportunities to show us what challenges are inherent in these opportunities, including the complexities, the trade-offs in our choices of strategy, including transformation investment and all the dimensions that in order to fulfill both environmental, social, and governance responsibilities, we do have to make very constructive engagement and choices of strategies. Policy incentives to create a healthy environment for responsible investment is key. Thank you very much, Dr. Sun. And now let's move on to our next speaker, Mr. Bai Chengyu, on establishing a cooperation platform for promoting SDG impact finance. Mr. Bai is the division chief of CICETE and an old colleague of mine, and the office director for UNDP CICETE project of research and promotion SDG financing in China.
I will give you a very brief introduction of what we are doing together with UNDP China to promote the SDG finance in China. I think everybody knows the global background that in order to support the SDG, and we need lots of investment funds, but the traditional international multilateral and bilateral aid fund are limited. But at the same time, a lot of innovation happened on financial market. And I think it's also the similar situation in China. As you know, in recent years, a lot of new concepts such as impact finance, social investment, value investment, and ESGs are developed and very fast in China. And all this concept is becoming the mainstream activities, especially in green finance. And both Chinese government and local government and the private sector and NGOs are participate in this movement very actively. And lots of related projects and investment already happened, such as in fields of poverty alleviation, microcredit and microfinance, green finance, public health, and education. As Grace introduced, I have been involved in microfinance for more than 20 years. So this is a long-term story. But in China, there are a lot of challenges and needs of SDG finance development. First, as the previous colleague introduced, we need policy arrangements and legal systems set up. And second is we need standardization and assessment on SDG finance. And third, we need all-round development, not only green finance. You know, green finance is developed very fast, and I believe China is the leader of green finance in the world. But for the other aspect, we also need more support and innovation. And in order to promote the SDG finance in China, so we start a kind of new program or project to promote these activities. So in 2018, UNDP and CICETE, China International Center for Economic and Technical Exchange, we are working together. We start a new project named Promotion and Research on SDG Impact Finance in China. There are several components under this project. First is to set up a platform for policy dialogue. And second is to conduct policy research and promotion. And third is to develop of taxonomy standards and assessment tools. And fourth is demonstration to demonstrate the innovations. And we are cooperating with Shenzhen Special Zone, the municipality government, to start a kind of sub-project to do some innovation in Shenzhen. And we will set up a project database for the investment. And finally, the fifth is we continue to support the innovation in microfinance and financial inclusion sectors. So because Mr. He Jie, the Director General of Financial Management and Supervision and Regulation Department of Shenzhen, we will give you a very detailed introduction on what they are doing in Shenzhen. So I will leave more time for Mr. He Jie, and I will show you this output. This is what we have developed under this project. We published last year. This is the technical report on the SDG finance taxonomy in China, both in English and Chinese. If you are interested, you can go to UNDP Beijing website and to download this report. So that is my introduction. So thank you again. That's all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bai. And we look forward to reading that report. I see it has a list of projects, and I hope we can facilitate more partners to work to scale up those projects to join force with you. Thank you very much. Now, let me welcome our last but not least distinguished speaker, Mr. He Jie, Director General of the Local Financial Supervision and Administration of Shenzhen Municipality in China. Under Mr. He's leadership, the Bureau innovated practices regarding governance and risk management of internet finance and provided valuable Shenzhen experiences for peer cities in China. Prior to that, Mr. He served as Deputy Mayor of Futian District, the famous financial district of Shenzhen, and worked for 25 years in the Shenzhen Stock Exchange. So Mr. He, thank you very much for sharing perspectives from local government on this important topic. The floor is yours.
Distinguished leaders and guests, good morning. I am He Jie, Director General of the Local Financial Supervision and Administration of Shenzhen. I'm very glad to attend this workshop. On behalf of the administration, I would like to congratulate on the convening of the workshop, and thank you very much for your long-term support for our financial development. Shenzhen is one of the best special economic zones in China. Over the past 40 years, it has developed from a frontier town to a metropolitan with 20 million people. The annual growth of GDP is 20%, the number 5 in Asia. President Xi Jinping directed out at the 40th anniversary of Shenzhen that it is a brand new city created by Chinese people, an embodiment of the socialism with Chinese characteristics, and a miracle created by Chinese people. It is a city of innovation with Huawei, Tencent, BYD, DJI, and Shunfeng. It has 18,000 high-tech companies, second only to Beijing. Last year, high-tech and strategic industries accounts for 37% of the GDP. PCT application ranks the first in China over the past 70 years. Last year, 3 million entities have registered here, and among them, 2 million are enterprises. And innovation and entrepreneurship ranked the first in China. Last year, WIPO issued the Global Innovation Index, and the cluster of Shenzhen, Hong Kong, Guangzhou is the second in the world, second only to Tokyo and Yokohama. With its fast development, finance industry is also developing rapidly. It is one of the 3 financial centers in China. The increment has increased from 220 million yuan to 400 billion yuan, with an annual growth of 20%. Last year, faced with the COVID-19, financial industry is moving against the tide, with an annual growth of 9%, accounting for 15% of the GDP. It is stabilizing the economic development of Shenzhen. In the latest Global Financial Center Index, Shenzhen ranks number 8 in the world, and its financial technology ranks the 4th, surpassing London for the first time. In the new industrial and technology revolution, technology is integrated with finance. It is a consensus that technology is a must for financial development. Shenzhen was among the first to pay attention and support to financial technology. In 2016, Shenzhen issued China's first supporting policy for financial technology and developed the first financial technology index, and has 2 special awards. Thanks to the foundations and quality environment, it has become a center or hub for financial technology with the following features. It has a Ping An Technology, WeBank, Tencent Financial Technology. 15 enterprises are among the top 50 of KPMG financial technology companies, and 20 are among the 84 listed companies of Xiangmi Lake Financial Technology Index. And it has rich applications in banking, securities, insurance, payment, supply chain, finance, and etc. Financial and Shenzhen also has a pilot for digital currency. Now we have the PBOC's Digital Currency Institute, Future Financial Regulation Research Center, and China's only Financial Technology Assessment Center. And it has the first licensed personal credit institution. And we are working with the Hong Kong Monetary Authority and the Macau Monetary Authority, learning from the CFA and the FRM, to launch the Shenzhen, Hong Kong, Macau Financial Technician Plan and written 13 textbooks. It is an experiment in the context of the one country, two systems, and where we have completed level 1 tests and we're promoting level 2 tests. Sustainable development is a consensus of the world and is a name card of Shenzhen. According to the opinions of the demonstration zone of Shenzhen for building socialism with Chinese characteristics, one of the major positioning is that it's a pioneer for sustainable development. 40% coverage greenage is very high in China. It has national forestry city, international garden city, and has 100% EV for buses and taxis. PM 2.5 concentration of last year was 18 micrograms. It ranks 6 in terms of air qualification. Now, the sustainable financial ecosystem is taking shape. In green finance, in June 2017, the Shenzhen Green Finance Commission was established. It has been participating in researches and the meetings of G20 Sustainable Financial Research Group, UNEP Financial Centers for Sustainability, and other conventions to upgrade Shenzhen's influences in green finance. Now we are applying for the second batch of national green finance reform pilots. We have carried out green credit bonds, funds, insurances, and carbon finance to create an engine for green development. In October 2019, the Financial Center for Sustainability has settled its real economy economic lab here. And last year, the Greater Bay Green Finance Alliance has its secretariat also located here. It's worth mentioning that we have the first local legislation on green finance. We have a regulation of a green finance issued in March with the following inventions. We require a mandatory environmental information disclosure for listed companies in financial industry, green bond issuers, and companies ensuring green policies. And we require green investment assessment for projects with over 50 million and annual emission of over 3,000 tons. And we have a green investment management system for these enterprises to assess themselves. And we also have the administrative punishment authority delegated to the local financial departments to punish those violators of green regulations and green assessment and disclosure regulations. And we have carried out many steps to increase our influences. We have issued the document and guidance to encourage the social influence in Futian district. And we also have the China Global Philanthropy Institute and 77 institutions to launch the Xiangmihu Consensus. And by the end of the March, 13 institutions has joined the PRI of the UN. In the country, we have 56. And thirdly, we have many innovative practices. For example, WeChat services for cross-border remittance for the Philippines services, and also Tencent cancer medicine, and also Kingdee microfinance platform. And we're working together with the Ping An Trust to launch the Shenzhen Philanthropy Common Fund, and also the development opinion issued by the Financial Bureau and the Federation for People with Disabilities. So from last year to this year, 25 listed companies and 12 institutions have jointly launched the Xiangmi Lake Female Directors Declaration. In April, when President Xi was attending the climate summit, he said that we should adhere to green development and multilateralism, and also common but differentiated responsibilities to build a community with shared future. We have incorporated carbon emission peak and neutrality into our plan, and we will set examples. We'll work with the international community to promote economic development through sustainable financial development, and to have more international cooperation and contribute our effort to the world's sustainable development. I wish this workshop a success. Thank you.
And then now we have had such a rich discussion on the policy perspectives for SDG-aligned investment. The speakers has answered so many questions that were in my mind before joining this webinar, from global, regional perspective, but also presenting us concrete examples of how development banks and how various projects and local government are utilizing SDGs as the landmark to guide investment practices today. All this, we would like to have our dear partner, Finance Center for South-South Cooperation, to help us reflect on and summarize and look forward to what we can do together in the future. So I welcome Dr. Zhou Meixiang, Deputy Director General of Finance Center for South-South Cooperation, China. Dr. Zhou is also a Senior Social Development Consultant to World Bank. Dr. Zhou represents our partner and coordinator for the series of webinars, Finance Center for South-South Cooperation. So Dr. Zhou, the floor is yours.
I'll try my best to summarize all the key insights and points raised by our distinguished speakers, but it's a very difficult task. I know at this webinar, the following keywords are mentioned by different speakers. The keywords including greater joint efforts, green finance, transitional finance, green technology, jobs, building back better, stronger, greener, and sustainable. So the discussion centered at the latest updates, emerging issues, and constructive recommendations around the current situation and the pandemic impacts, and also the needs for more finance and the ESG policies, sustainable policies. Please allow me to include some of the important insights below. although it's difficult to mention each and every of the important insights. Firstly, the discussions call for more and faster finance, new financial models, and policies. Speakers from our UN agencies pointed out that the current COVID-19 pandemic and the daunting climate challenges are bringing threats of debt crisis for the global south. They further highlighted that it's crucial to explore greater joint efforts across countries, higher income countries and lower income countries, and more policy options to promote resilient and stable financial frameworks and building back better recovery from the pandemic. And China-Ethiopian experience of sharing experience technologies are mentioned as a good practice among the number of good examples. The discussions show that the world is calling for more and faster financial tasks through South-South cooperation. And the current finance for sustainable development is clearly not enough. More innovative cooperative models are needed. The dialogues at this webinar revealed that some important figures indicating the enormous needs for more finance. To achieve SDGs by 2030 needs $5 to $7 trillion each year. To implement the SDGs, the Paris Climate Agreement, which was entered into force in 2016, means a $23 trillion investment opportunities and needs between 2017 and 2030 to meet net zero carbon emissions by 2050 and 2060. Take China, for example. The total amount of investments needed for China is estimated to be around 100 to 200 trillion RMB for over the next 4 decades, and some estimated at 7 trillion Chinese yuan each year. When it comes to policies on sustainable investment, the 2015 Investment Policy Framework for Sustainable Development was mentioned. This mentioned by our AIIB speaker. It was officially launched at the Financing for Development Conference in Addis Ababa, provides guidance for policymakers in the evolution towards a new generation of investment policies. And the investment policy framework consists of an overarching set of core principles for investment policymaking. I'm pleased to hear that one of these webinar co-hosts, which is UNOSSC, has finalized the United Nations system-wide strategy on South-South and triangular cooperation in 2020 to promote robust investment and South-South cooperation. And it said this strategy was developed through coordination of the UNOSSC with over 30 UN entities and 15 UN resident coordinators in the countries. And I heard Professor Justin Lin's keynote speech outlined that key areas for greater and joint global efforts to create millions of jobs, improve infrastructure connectivity for industrialization and SDGs. Higher income countries are called to assist the lower income countries in green finance, green technologies, and also opening up their markets for the lower income countries. Green bonds are particularly needed, and multilateral institutions and banks have a key role to play here. Secondly, ESG investment is also mentioned as its mainstreaming, and ESG policies offers a holistic investment approach and toolkit for sustainable development. An increasing number of ESG policy instruments are either newly established or revised in recent years. ESG standards receive increasing attention from investors and policymakers and are increasingly adopted in investment process and decision making. In 2020 alone, as mentioned by our UNPRI presentations earlier, 120 new or revised policy instruments were established, 22 more than that in 2019. In total, there are now more than 500 policies regarding ESG and sustainable investment. In relation to cooperation and investment in tackling climate change, the Paris Climate Agreement is a landmark, as mentioned, in the multilateral climate change process. By now, there are more than 120 countries have pledged carbon neutrality by 2050, and China has pledged to get there before 2060. So we see great progress has achieved, but there is still a long way to go. Thirdly, multilateral development banks accelerate a sustainable development finance, as mentioned by our speakers from AIIB and ADB. In 2019, the multilateral development banks set a collective target of at least $65 billion by 2025 to meet climate change finance targets. And they also have taken some financial approaches to support environmental and social frameworks. Today, I heard that AIIB speaker explained how their infrastructure financing supports SDGs. AIIB has put investments in water resources and waste management, digital platforms related to other economics and social sectors, digital platforms, cross-border connectivity, climate-related disaster management are extremely important, as highlighted by the AIIB speakers. And I also heard that ADB speakers mentioned their emergency finance to Asian countries in mitigating COVID-19 impacts. And ADB Strategy 2030 highlights investment policies which focuses on tackling climate change, environmental sustainability, and social progress in relation to gender equality, quality education and jobs, reducing poverty and inequality, and also strengthening governance and institutional capacity. Both AIIB and ADB, once there are projects to contribute to COVID-19 emergency financing, digital economy and technologies, inclusive growth, and infrastructure. And they also require their project sponsor to improve ESG standards. Fourthly, at national level and local government level, policy innovations are also mentioned by speakers from China, and including Shenzhen municipality. The webinar saw that the Chinese national and Shenzhen municipal government issued very important frameworks as our policy instruments. A new environmental protection law took effect in 2015, and the Chinese national guidelines for establishing the green financial system was issued in 2016, and the green investment guidelines and governance principles for listed companies were put in effect in 2018. These policies set requirements for listed companies in disclosing ESG information and measures. It was mentioned at the discussion that the Belt and Road green investment principles were also issued to commit to green and low carbon investment in 2018 for green finance along Belt and Road countries. China-US joint efforts in climate change were also outlined at this webinar. Shenzhen City put Shenzhen Green Finance Ordinance in effect in March 2021, this year. It is the first comprehensive lawful regulation on green finance in China. And for the first time, this regulation requires mandatory environmental information disclosure and urges to improve supervision and monitoring of green finance. Further, some speakers touched upon corporate level of sustainable investment policies, as mentioned by the Haotong speakers. Such policies are increasingly put in place to encourage and facilitate companies to exit from coal, fossil fuel, and other such heavy emissions industries. And more investment inputs are required to renewable energy, electrical vehicles, and supporting infrastructure. Many companies have set sustainable investment principles internally. Let me highlight them below. First, more policy instruments in social and governance domains are needed. Most of the policies are from environmental domain with limited or lacking social elements, and later gradually expand to social and governance domain is needed. Green finance, it is insufficient now, and we need more and faster, especially in agriculture sector of many countries, which is often had less attention from investors. But the agricultural sector plays key role in biodiversity protection and in tackling biodiversity loss. So hopefully more importance can be attached to this sector investment. Many developing countries are still at starting point in sustainable investment, and their policies and regulations are not mature or well enforced. Policies are lacking in clearly defined sustainable investment and green investment, evaluation indicators, scope of reporting, taxonomy, classification of investments and risks, subsidy policies for stronger ESG practice, and also penalty instruments for violence are also lacking. So new international agreements shall be steered to embrace sustainable investment principles for signatory member countries or entities, to strengthen multilateralism in trade and investment, and also South-South cooperation. Incentives, including tariff policy reforms, are also required. Looking forward, further actions and cooperation are welcome. As speakers emphasized at this webinar, we need more and faster investment in order to materialize SDGs by 2030 and carbon neutrality by 2050. Obviously, stronger multilateralism shall play a critical role in South-South cooperation and investment. I would like to echo one of today's speakers to stress that ESG investors, sustainable investors, shall not only focus on environmental impact, but also please pay higher attention to social impact of green transition. We hope to share more insights and catalyze greater efforts to facilitate more cross-border sustainable investment for SDGs and net zero carbon goals. We will host more sessions of this webinar series. Audiences are more than welcome to visit our website of South-South Galaxy, which is a knowledge sharing platform for South-South cooperation, and our global think tanks network for South-South cooperation. We value all partners and audiences' opinions and invite you all to participate in our survey by scanning the code on the screen. You can also scan the code for our Global South-South Development Center projects for further contacts and collaboration with us. See you soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mei Xiang, for this concluding remarks. And thank you again, all distinguished speakers and participants. All the discussions of this series of webinars will feed into an upcoming report on this topic, SDG-aligned responsible investment and South-South cooperation. So we welcome all speakers today, as well as interested viewers of this webinar series, to submit your research papers to us. Thank you very much, everybody.